One second. Let me take this off the screen. Okay. Greetings, everyone. Welcome to A Walk with the Master. My name is Dr. Gabriel Hernandez, and I'm here with my Sifu Jeff Larson. We this has been a long time coming. Try to get some things going here so we can keep the continuity going and record this valuable information. Sifu, can you start by telling us a little bit about your background when you started training and you know bring us up to speed a little bit?
Yeah, sure. Um, this is my 48th year of unbroken practice in Southern Praying Mantis Kung Fu and Tensing Qigong. I trained for the first 7 years with Jin Fun Mark, also known as Mok Fun in Minneapolis, Minnesota. When I let it be known that I was moving to Atlanta, I was told, not asked, that I would be teaching when I got there. To that point, no one in his school, that to my knowledge, was running a school besides his. So that was the first school outside of Minneapolis. There were a few clubs that were around Minneapolis, but it was strange because they weren't really fully sanctioned. And on the big group pictures that existed on the walls, little by little, there would be heads with black circles on them. So it's important to be sanctioned. Meaning, some people went out and thought they would teach. Not a good idea. The master says when you're ready to teach and when you're not. So I started teaching in Minneapolis, and then I found a spot in a boxing club. I was teaching there for about a year, and a private student brought in a flyer for someone teaching Southern Praying Mantis nearby, and I thought, well, that can't be. I'm the only one in the South that's approved. So I went over to see who this character was, and it was Grandmaster Yee. Well, of course, I went in humbly, introduced myself, and we had a discussion. He said, well, can you do a 3-step arrow? I said, sure, I can do, or Sambojin. Yeah, I can do that. So I did that, and he finished, and he goes, thumbs up, 100% Jin Fun Mark. You got no foundation. So, yeah, so I went into he said, come here. Goes into the next room. He had a pretty big school. And he does Tun Sao and throws his energy down, and boom, kind of, you could hear the floor. It was all cement. You could hear it vibrate. You could feel it vibrate. And he pulled it up and started shooting 3-step arrow. And I thought, what in the world is this? I'd never seen Kung Fu like this before. And we talked a little bit more, and I agreed that I would close my school and come over and teach under him. And I thought that was fine. It was Southern Praying Mantis family. And so that's what I did. And that was I think in late 87 or early 1988. And then I was a student of Sifu's for until his death a few years ago. And I ended up entering the gate under Sifu. I became a disciple under Sifu. I went with him to the very first competition that in Houston, Texas, ironically, that I think it was around 89 or 90. And Sifu was upstairs teaching, and I did Southern shorthand, and I did internal Kung Fu. And I took second out of 5 continents and I think 15 countries. And then I won gold for the Southern Praying Mantis and Southern shorthand. So I went upstairs and told Sifu, and that was great. And then that was the base of this second article in Inside Kung Fu magazine. So yeah, so the first time that one of his students went out and competed, we won a gold medal.
Powerful. Definitely. How did you discover the martial arts? How did you get started?
I was just always interested. And like many people, I think David Carradine was a part of that, and then finding out about Bruce Lee and stopping every chance I got in a bookstore and pulling books off the shelf by Bruce Lee. And it was funny because he had a couple of small books, and I sat in the bookstore for about an hour, crouched down in the aisle, hoping they didn't kick me out, because you're not supposed to hang around the bookstore like that. And there were two Bruce Lee books, not the Jeet Kune Do. They were short books, and I studied the pictures, and then I start doing what I often do, analyzing how many kicks, how many punches, where to, and half of all the techniques in both those books were groin strikes, which was interesting. It basically showed that it displayed the element of fight weakness, not strength, So, and I think that's what in the early days it's in those books, and I've never seen them since. They were hardcover books, and
wow.
I went back to try to find them and never could. Yeah, so I've been teaching Unbroken for 48 years. I'm the only teacher in the system to ever produce a training video. I have multiple national and national magazines in Wushu Kung Fu and in Kung Fu Inside Kung Fu magazine. I've written 2 books, The Power of Qigong and Ancient Wisdom for Changing Times, and have probably taught more private students than any teacher I'm aware of in the system.
Okay. What attracted you originally specifically to Southern Praying Mantis? Being that you had some Bruce Lee influence, and maybe watching David Carradine, you're probably thinking about Shaolin and things.
Yeah,
like
when
that.
I went around Minneapolis, where I was living at the time, and started checking out schools, I did hands with people at each of the schools, and the guy that was doing the Southern Praying Mantis stuff seemed to have he was fast, he could slice, and it was a pretty good sized school. There were probably 30 or 40 students there. And they had good sized schools at that time. And I just really, really liked the system. It's kind of one of those things, when you know. I thought, yeah, this is the one I want. And I had been to a number of schools before, but they're so linear. And one of the neat things about Southern Praying Mantis is it's circular, like with Muay Sao, and it was cutting, not banging, and it was circular, not linear. And from a geometry physics standpoint, it was more practical, more logical, and by far more applicable. So I just really liked it. So, and I thought to myself, when I started, I looked around the school, and the people who were new were all the way in the back, right? So I was one of the new guys, and as I practiced, I thought, boy, if I can get to the end of 1 year, I'll be pretty good, And then I got to the end of 1 year, and I go, boy, those guys at the end of 2 years, they're pretty good, I thought, well, maybe if I got to 5 years, Then I got to the end of the 5 years, and almost everybody else was gone. It was all new people in the 1 and 2 year slots. And I thought, well, I got to 5 years, but boy, do I have a lot to learn. and that's the beauty of Kung Fu. There's never not more to learn. So, I did get some private, direct teaching from Mak Foon. Mak Foon didn't do a lot of individual teaching. And if he did, you always worked in groups. And as time went on, you got closer to the altar, and he would come up and just point you out, and you'd go over, and you had like one time to learn a form, because he did that to me one time, and I'm like, what? I'm getting called out. He's going to show me something in front of the whole school, and he did, and I copied it, and then I asked him a question, and he did a little bit more, and then he was done. It's like, better remember that, It was unsaid, but yeah, his technique was good,
Yeah, I've been watching some of his videos more recently, and I see some really high level movement. It seems like. Was he your first Kung Fu instructor?
No, I had accomplished my yellow stripe in Taekwondo some years before that. when I was living in high school and living in Rockford, Illinois. That was my very first. And
Okay.
after that, yeah, after that it was Southern Praying Mantis, and I did study Wing Chun with
Okay.
with Cecil Sayapao. Yeah, and did you train with
Okay.
Cecil?
Yeah, a little bit. He's, more than training, he's kind of like my big brother in Chinese medicine. But
Okay.
while I was at the school, yeah, he did invite me out. So, eh, I'm actually, so originally the first day I met Cecil was a day or two after I had almost lost my hand, and so I walk into school in a sling, and Dr. Mark's looking at me like, "What happened?" And I tell him, I almost lost my hand, almost got chopped off, it literally got chopped halfway through the wrist, and he's like, "Okay, no worries, we're gonna get some needles in you," and he started throwing everything at me, and Cecil's sitting there while I'm talking to Dr. Mark, and I hadn't met him, and his accent threw me off when I first heard him speak, because I'm looking at him like, black guy with a Chinese kind of a hood accent. I was like, that's a weird combination, but I said okay. But he looks at me. He say, "Oh, no problem." He said, "I give you my student number. He teach you qigong. You'd be just fine." And I was like, okay. And that was my introduction. Although I had been reading about qigong, um, and I knew already not to kind of dabble in certain things without instruction. So I've been reading Montauk Chia's book, and was very interested. And so this kind of like, I don't want to say it fell in my lap, but he was like, so he gave me the number. I called his student, and over the next 6 weeks, I trained pretty much all day, just Silam Tao. And through that, which is the Qigong of Wing Sun. And uh, through using that, I was able to rehabilitate my hand, my wrist, and mind you, it was pretty significant because um, when I got cut, it took me a couple weeks to go in and get surgery to maybe reconnect some tendons and things. And so
Okay.
they attempted to do that, but by the time I got there, everything had retracted either into my hand or into my arm.
Yeah.
And
Oh, yeah. I was waiting for that.
yeah, and they couldn't reconnect it. And so the doctor was like, we tried. Sorry. It's like they cut me open for nothing, put me back together. And, I hear what they're saying, but I'm not accepting anything that they're saying.
Who was teaching you the qigong?
It was his student. It was a guy named Phil, I want to say.
Dr. Mark's student or Cecil's student?
Cecil student. Yeah, his name was Phil. He was an Aikido practitioner, but
Okay.
he was blending Aikido and Wing Chun together. But apparently, Cecil was pleased with his Sealam Tao, so he wanted him to teach me that. And I mean,
Yeah, I may have met him at workshops,
okay,
like a Cecil workshop.
okay, definitely, yeah, yeah. But so yeah, that's how I met Cecil, and so like I said, I trained with him a few times, but for the most part, he'd be at school, randomly just pop up to learn or to share some information that he had recently got, or he might bring Sifu uh, to the school to share some. Occasionally, Sifugu would come over, and because Dr. Mark would request Sifugu so that he could teach us, what do you call it, like emergency medicine. Sifugu, as you know, was also tied in, with the the underworld, if you will. And so, from what he explained to us, is that anytime anybody in the mob was shot or stabbed, they didn't go to the hospital. They went to Sifugu's house, and he would patch
Yeah,
him up there.
yeah, that makes sense because that would be, I mean, that was the purpose of the Tong,
Yep,
um, to service all community needs.
yep.
So, and who was Cecil training with in New York?
In New York, I want to say it was the guy that you told me about one time. That you met in China. what's the gentleman's name that Ip Man sent to New York?
He was the last disciple of It Man.
Yeah. What's his name?
Was it Muyat?
Moyat. Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I
Correct.
got to go to lunch with Muyat
Yeah, I remember you
after.
told me a great story. Can you tell that story?
Yeah. So there was a workshop, and I attended the workshop, and I was hanging out with a few of the teachers afterwards, and I really enjoyed it. Um, and then it was time to go to lunch, and Moyat was nearby, and the guys I'm about to take off, and Moyat looks at him and says something, and they go, "You're invited to lunch." I thought, okay, well, I thought, well, that's cool. I'm because whenever I go into a different environment, unless somebody asks, I never say who I am. Now they knew because I knew Cecil, and I was Sifu Yee's assistant instructor at the school,
Hmm.
so they knew that, and so I guess that got me into lunch. So we go to lunch, and I'm directly across the table from Moyat, and I'm just really mostly listening, right? Because I thought you're not in a position where they didn't come to learn praying mantis, so just shut up and try to absorb something from about their art, right?
Uh,
So, and I'm kind of glancing over and I'm looking at, and I see Moyat kind of like almost staring at me. So
yeah.
I look directly at him, and he goes, and everybody just kind of goes quiet. He goes, "You know Sungong?" And if you know Sungong, you don't say you know Sungong. So you never do. And I say, well, Sifu's taught me quite a few things. I know what you're referring to, but I don't know that I would say that I know Sungong. He goes, no, you know Sungong. And I thought, well, for a master like Muyat, for Ip Man's last disciple to be looking at some guy that he just met, going, Sanggung. And for people who know, that's spiritual kung fu.
Uh-huh.
So are you very aware of it?
Oh, only from what you've taught me. Only from what just the stories you've said. You've
Yeah, so
mentioned it a few
briefly, so
times.
people have an understanding, so we don't just leave them out there. If you're in a situation where it's life or death, the and the pillars of character uh, in the martial arts and all your practice, if you haven't broken the chain, if you're connected, if the pillars of character are in place, it's not you fighting. In other words, the master has come through you in a
Mm,
life and death situation. So that's Sun Gong, spiritual kung fu.
wow.
But and you can't learn Sun Gong. It's not a form. There are no specific moves. So unless the pillars of character are in place, um, uh, the energy can't get to you.
Wow.
Because you had asked in one of the questions leading up to this conversation, you had wanted to know about the vortex, right?
Yes. Yes.
By definition, if someone is a real martial artist and has what I would call a real altar, um, then that altar is protected. It's guarded, right? Because if you open a vortex or an energy center, um, you can't control what comes through there, right?
Mm,
It's a whole. It's universe. Good can come and bad can come, right? So, but what keeps the bad out are again the pillars of character that set the guardians by the side of the altar that keep evil from coming through.
got it. Wow.
So that's why you're very, very, very careful about what you do in the practice of an altar and what's called never breaking the chain. For example, you can't touch a student, right? Ever. And if you ever do anything out of character or break the chain of the connection of the masters, it doesn't reconnect. So
Mm,
you have to, if you're going to accept the responsibility of training a high level kung fu system on a high level, or if that your master who's trained you has informed you how to do certain practices, and you have the ability to open a vortex, you better know what the heck you're doing. In other words, and your character has to be flawless. You cannot have, you know, and when you go to the altar, you've got to be clean. In other words, if you have sex the night before, you got to shower. There are a number of things that you have to do. You have to wash your hands with cold water, um, and you have to enter from the right and leave to the left. So these are things that when you mentioned about the practice of the altar, that that will work on together.
Okay, definitely.
But that was the story of Muyat, and Muyat passed, I think, a couple of years later. But I was always honored to the fact that I actually not only got to train at the workshop with him, or that he even bothered to talk to me at all, but to mention Sung Gung, that's like as high as you can go, you know.
yeah, yeah,
And so I was completely honored, and I don't know, because I don't know if guys that he trained or the extension of the guys he trained even knew what Sung Gung was. The
interesting.
only way you ever know is a master tells you. It's not a classroom thing. It's like I said, if you know it, you don't talk about it. I would never meet anybody in the street outside of a conversation like you and I are having here and never mention Sung Gung.
Definitely. It does give me some things to think about, especially with my situation I had a few years ago, and I won't mention here, but I know you mentioned how you met Grandmaster Yee, but what was your first impression of him?
He was quiet and reserved. He was respectful, right? And he didn't need to be respectful for me. I'm, 20 years younger. His kung fu is miles beyond what mine is, right? Um, and his life story, and he had trained with the Grandmaster, so he didn't really have to. He didn't even have to talk to me if he didn't want to. But yeah, but he was respectful enough to say, okay, who is your teacher? Let's see what you got. That's not. Let me show you how to make that fuller, which he didn't have to do by displaying his sambojin. And then we discussed more, and he invited me, and I decided that I would come over to his school, and bring. I had 8 students at the time, and he had just opened, so he had one student,
Okay.
right? So overnight we had 9 students, so that was good, and yeah, and I just became, uh, I'm one of those people who I was like a bad penny. I just never left, you know,
Just got
and
stuck.
yeah, and I was training somebody recently, and it dawned on me. I thought, I taught them something new on a form, right? They're like, oh, geez, oh man, this is new, and oh, so it's not like it was before. It's I got to do this now, and I'm thinking, when I was training, if I got a new technique, I'm like, wow, this is cool. I can't wait till I get the next new technique, and then
Uh,
one after that and one after that. So I don't understand it. It showed me like, you're somebody who wants kung fu, or you're somebody who doesn't. And if you don't really want it, yeah, you could train it for basic application or defend yourself, your wife, your family, but that was not what we call a kung fu person. Not like you or I. Like we're kung fu crazy. We're hungry for everything we get.
Facts. Yeah, that's true. Um, what made Qigong different in your eyes from other martial arts teachers that you've met or been around? Because I know you've been around, you know, a lot of guys
Yeah.
for a long time.
Now, let me compare it to Mok Fun. With Mok Fun, most of the forms you learn from your Dai Se Hing, your older brother, the one who was basically kind of running the school under the master. And little by little, we would get a new technique, a new form, something. And I have to make this comment because a lot of people didn't know this about Mok Fun, but he had there were like 7 styles in his Southern Praying Mantis, because he was Mr. Hong Kong, so he used to be a bodybuilder. His uncle was one of the guards, a really really high ranking general, and I think he studied Tiger. And so Mok Fun had Tiger, Crane, rabbit of all things, and I don't really know if I could do a rabbit move, leopard, um, snake, um, and one or two others that were inside the southern praying mantis
Hmm.
technique. So in a praying mantis technique, you would open by doing like a crane technique, up underneath the chin, and at some point you do tiger and tear an ear off, in your two-man forms. So
Mm.
it was pretty cool stuff.
Okay.
Did
Okay.
I
So
get off
yeah,
track
yeah.
there?
I wouldn't say off track, but you were making the, I guess, the differentiation between what you saw with Jim from Mark and what you saw with Seagull in
Yeah,
training.
and
'Cause
the other thing, that was the other point was Jin Foon Mark would give you a little bit by little bit by little bit. And when I got to Sifu's, and it was like the first, second, or week or two, and he went to explain this form, it was literally like he was dumping a bucket of kung fu on the table. It's like all these, and this is this technique, and this is that, and this is how you do this. And I'm like, my brain's like frying, going, uh, you know, I was used to getting a little bit and being grateful for the next 6 months, and this guy, Sifu Yi, is like, here's the kung fu. I'm like, you're blowing my mind. It's like I'm just kind of like trying to gather it up. Like, I gotta write this down as soon as I leave here, And I did. Or, we had notebooks back in those days. I wrote
yeah.
down everything we could, but he was completely open, and
Okay.
and he got in trouble, as you know, because he was teaching the Lofan.
Mm.
You can't teach the foreign devils, the whites, the blacks, the non-Chinese, you
Yeah.
know. So the Tong, which in Atlanta was initially going to support him, retracted the $40,000 a year that they were going to pay him,
Mm.
right, to keep afloat,
Yeah.
right, because he was teaching Lofan. So that was a big difference.
Yeah.
And Makun taught Lofan too.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, because if I remember correctly, I mean, I've been buying Inside Kung Fu and Black Belt magazine since the '80s, as far back as I could walk to the store, you know. And I actually still have my first. It was a Black Belt special edition. It was a Bruce Lee special, and, and I mean, it had everything, the stuff in there about Bruce Lee that is just now hitting like the main airwaves. So I find that interesting because I used to read that magazine over and over and over and over every day, and but now it's like some of those secrets. Like I just saw a video just yesterday, and it was saying, "I bet you don't know what Bruce Lee's first martial art was," and I was like, "I do." His father started teaching him at 6 Tai Chi, Wu style. And
Oh,
then
that's cool.
I clicked on it, and they were like, "Yes, no, you would never guess he was a Tai Chi stylist first." And I was like, "Okay."
Which style of Tai Chi was it?
Wu. His father was quite an accomplished Wu style practitioner, and apparently, in the Chinese operas and the movie world of Hong Kong at that time, he was one of the four heroes. So he was top guy, back
Yeah,
then.
I remember that his dad was in like Chinese opera,
Yes,
and uh,
and a huge movie star in Hong Kong, huge.
wow, that's cool.
Yeah, that part I didn't know. So when I clicked on the video, they talked about a little bit more about his background, which is pretty interesting. I was like, because I read about the Tai Chi and stuff like that, but that's kind of where they left it, and they mentioned the opera and left it there as well,
Uh,
but they didn't mention his prominence at the time. Um, I guess let's see. Oh, here's a good one. What did Qigong teach you, or are there some lessons that you share that did not have anything to do with combat?
well, I'd say the biggest lesson, which was a surprise, when he asked myself and another student one time in a private class and over the summer once, and he said, "What is the tell me what is the goal of kung fu? All our qigong and our kung fu. What is the goal? What is the end result? That's what it was. What is the end result?" And we're like, well, defend yourself, good technique. We're like, yeah, respect to the masters, all this stuff. And we're thought, yeah, we got this, we got this question. And he just looks at us and goes, love. He said the end goal of all the training was love. And we
Mm.
thought, well, you wouldn't think that,
Yeah.
but and over the years, it's made more and more sense because it is kind of a result. Because even against, if you're fighting an opponent, and Bruce Lee would say this, you're not fighting an opponent, you're fighting yourself, you know.
Yes.
So it's a lot of it is like so you don't dislike them, you don't dislike their style or anything. You're just martial artists exchanging, you know, the physics and geometry, of your
Mm.
art, and kind of,
That's
there
right.
are a lot of martial artists say, "Hey, let's do hands," and for the most part, they're liars. Not meaning they don't really want to do hands; they want to know if they can beat you, you know. And so, I say I don't do that because we don't train for points, you
Mm.
know. We don't train to tap you and jump back, We train the way that kung fu is life or death. Real kung fu, you're training, to survive. So if somebody says, "Hey, let's touch hands," it's like you don't know what you're asking.
Yeah.
If you throw a punch at me, I'm going to blow
Go
out
to
your
sleep.
elbow. I'm
Yeah.
not gonna. I don't know how to. I don't know how to do all your little tappy stuff. You know.
Yeah.
So no, we're not going to play hands. So I think but no, those are more the early ones, or what I would call the six guns. Because when I first opened the school in Atlanta, the six guns were coming, on a pretty regular basis, and and you can tell them when they enter. One,
And when
they're
you say
usually
six, and we say six guns, these are the guys that are coming to test you.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
they're like the westerns.
Yeah.
They're the six guns. I call them the six guns. And so first thing I would do, and then they would come, "Hey, Sifu, this a guy wants to talk to you." I'd go over. So the first thing I would do is I would get up uncomfortably close to him, and he would, back up, and I'd get uncomfortably close to him and said, "How can I help you?" You know, well,
Yeah.
I was just, kind of thought I'd come in and see. I said, and it would take two sentences to go for them to get to the, you think we can touch hands? Can you show me something like what you do? So I said, I always told them, throw me a punch. And they're like, dude, you're kind of close to me. And I'm gonna hit you, you know. I said, no, just throw me a punch, you know. So they throw me a punch, and I would tap it, and then I'd end up tapping them, about six times, in under a second, you know.
Yeah.
Oh, and I would say, kind of like that, and they go, oh, okay, well, yeah, well, that's pretty much, well, okay, gotta go. I'm like, you have no idea what you just asked for. You throw me a punch, what the heck, maybe we can do hands. It's like, get out
Yeah.
of here, you know.
Yeah. I heard a story one time. I don't know if I ever shared it with you. From the gentleman that introduced me uh, to your school in Atlanta. If you remember, he's passed now a few years back, or about a decade now at least. Victor Clark.
Yeah, I remember Victor.
Victor, I remember he told me a story one time that he was in class with you guys and a six gun came in there. And I mean, I don't know who all was in the room, but he said somebody came into Sifu Yi school and was being disrespectful. And he, I guess he wanted to, he felt disrespected. And he said he ended up dealing with the guy, which was pretty interesting. He told a story, it was very, very short lived.
What did Victor end up doing hands with him, you say?
Yeah, I don't even think it was hands. I think they got to fighting.
Oh,
Um,
really?
yeah, I don't know how long it lasted. He kind of explained it to me, like uh, he kind of talked about the technique, and he's shown it to me before, but I haven't really seen anybody in our system demonstrate anything like that. And it was kind of like it reminded me of like a Tai Chi push or something like that.
Yeah,
Uh,
this is different. Sifu had taught me, and he was the one who would call them six guns, He'd say, if these did 6 tons come, yeah, here's what you do. And there was like 2 main techniques, which we won't tell people on this because those are our secret techniques. But
Right.
I'll tell you later.
Yeah,
I've referred to them before, so as soon as I say, you'll know.
yeah.
What
The
was it, more history or technique, or where would you like to go
yeah, no,
next?
oh yeah, oh man, I have so many questions. And I'll get into the techniques in a second, but I wanted for the people to see this, to really understand who you are, and your lineage, and who you're connected to. And like you taught me, and like Dr. Mark taught me, to me that's one of the most important things, because I consider myself to be standing on the shoulders of giants. So I understand that that's also the way that you operate as well. And so I feel it's only right. I as much as I want to talk about techniques and certain stuff, and to ask you about my personal training, but I think there's a lot of information that should be teased out, not only for myself, but just for the listening audience, for the people who are interested in this style, and for the future of this style. Because I know we've been, as it was explained to me, this was a secret style and still is to this day. And, you know, and it's interesting because it becomes more and more clear the more I watch and look at other Southern praying mantis schools and how they move and their lineage. And I respect them all, and, got love for all of them. But I realized that it's not exactly what I've been taught.
Yeah, and I think our system, I mean, when I say our, I mean under Grandmaster Yee, is more open in terms of of technique and philosophy,
Mhm.
um, than some of the others that I've seen on video or met from other schools.
Mhm.
Um, so I would say one thing that you had referenced, like standing on the shoulders of giants. One of the things that this system is or does that I really like is, so let's say I'm opening a class and I have an altar, right? Of course, I always present incense at the altar and then turn to the students. I salute the masters and then salute them. And then it's important that they know that a couple of things, and this is so simple, but very few people know it. When we light incense, it's not just to have the sandalwood smoking and uh, and have a nice pot with stuff burning and uh, look like a Shaolin temple or something.
Yes.
The smoke is how the masters travel. So when you light incense at an altar, that you're respecting them, and if they're going to come and see you, they're going to come on the smoke of the incense. They're going to ride that to get here. So, but the other thing, the most important, is always explaining as a teacher to students that we are, as teachers, basically mirrors. In other words, once I light that incense and turn around and look at them, right? I'm glass. I'm a window, right?
Mm.
The masters can see you now, right, through me, right?
Mm.
If I wasn't there, if I didn't do the incense, if I didn't have that relationship, they couldn't see you, right? And also, they're not going to see you if you haven't been told how to present incense or done the ceremony, or uh, are interested in carrying on the behavior that's reflective of the system. So we as teachers don't see ourselves as the end all. When you're looking toward the altar, you should see the altar. We're just there to help pass on information, right? We're not there for ego, right? You can't have any ego when you're teaching this, because one, compared to the masters, you're nothing. Your kung fu is like, you're simple. You're
Yeah.
like a kid. You
Yeah.
know, and so you need to always be aware of that, and then make sure that the students know, that you're not just it's not just me looking at you. You know, if I've lit incense and put that in there, and you're behind me, they can see you, right? So that's a really important thing too. That's why everything character-wise. And when I talk about the pillars of character, that's why it's so. When you enter a real school, and by a real school, you're going to see circles on the floor with lines in it. You have mentioned that in some of the early emails. Also, then when you've got the four directions, that you're in a pie, because a lot of people don't know either if they haven't read the Power of Qigong or Ancient Wisdom for Changing Times. They don't know that you basically have basically practices, or like a system, like a pie has forms, fighting, and weapons on one side, and acupuncture, acupressure, and qigong on the other. It has medicine, and the master is also probably literary, or in Western terms, a man of letters. You know, usually educated in other things.
Yes.
That's a true teacher. That's a true master. So in our system, our masters are masters. We embody all of those things. And Sifu was a poet. I'm a poet. Um, I've read extensive philosophy, as has Sifu. So, I mean, these are things that you don't do this. You don't do it for ego. And if you get to be a teacher level, you're you are committing for the system, right? You're not teaching for
Yes.
yourself. You carry on the system. And if a master has taught you, for example, for 20 years, you have a responsibility. And some people don't accept it, or they go away. But in my mind, I thought I have a responsibility. The 20 years he just spent with me, they're gone, right? He's not
Yeah.
as young. He's not as energetic. He can't repeat what he did. Those years are gone, and he probably has fewer in front than he does behind.
Mhm.
And so, if you accept the responsibility for teaching, that's a big responsibility. You're accepting the responsibility of carrying on the system. So not only are you glass, but you are tasked with, and you accept the responsibility. The system is greater than yourself, right? So you should always remember that, and that's why you really, really study it. And questions are great, because you have to reach in and find answers, right? So you
That's right.
really do learn when you start teaching.
Facts. That's right. Um, can you, I guess, tell me what it meant to you to become an Enter the Gate disciple?
Oh yeah, that was huge. I didn't even know that Enter the Gate disciples existed when I first started, right? Um, and when I was in Atlanta early on, I think as early as the first week of training with Sifu, I was back doing the stuff he had showed me. I finished, and I went out, and he had like a gift shop and uniforms, and he had an office in between. But he was out in the gift shop. He was at a desk there, had a desk there too. And he said, Jeff, he always called me Jeffries. Hey, Jeffries, I want to ask you questions. Okay, Sifu. Um, did Jinfu Mark ever give you anything to carry with you every day, your whole life? And I said, no, no, Sifu, we never did. Because he knew he had done a ceremony with me before I left to teach, to come to Atlanta. He goes, okay, all right. And what he was asking is, have you already entered somebody's gate? Right? And because if you have, then you can't enter mine. And the ceremony that I'd been through wasn't an enter the gate ceremony. So it was more like a blessing, right? So he said, okay, you can enter my gate. So yeah, so actually to have the opportunity to do that means that you're going to get more information, because you've accepted more responsibility, right? So having access to additional knowledge, uh, that for me, that excitement never ends, you know.
Definitely.
So that was probably the biggest part of it, was well, having a teacher trust you enough to connect their name to yours, to put you in their lineage, because they're only going to enter so many students, right? So
That's right.
yeah, so that was.
That being said, Sifu, can you explain like the traditional disciple relationship, disciple master relationship?
Oh gosh. Well, I've seen it exist in varying degrees. So it's a singular thing, but it's like a relationship between people. It has sort of a different thing depending on the master and the student, because But I think the biggest thing about entering discipleship is you are going to go through a ceremony that connects you to more to the masters than you were before. And you're making more of a commitment before. You are now agreeing to carry on the art. And I think that's probably the biggest thing is like your commitment, not only to the teacher, but to the art, and the teacher's commitment, knowing that you're connected to the art, to make sure that to make to be um, to make sure that you understand what you're learning. And one of the ways I would have to say this way because it was explained to me by others this way. If the Chinese, he was a Chinese master, like you, right, enough and trust you, they're going to be hard on you. Well, let me reword that. They're going to be mean to you because that's wrong. Yeah, it used to be good. What happened? And and they pick and they pick and they pick, but they wouldn't do that if they didn't like you, or because one time I remember Sifu saying, "This guy, well, I think it was one of the reunions, right?"
Mm-hmm.
And some guy had come from another school, and Sifu thought, "I think this guy thinks he's pretty good, his form's not too bad, But the guy finished, and Sifu goes, very good, you're good, yeah, you're. Well, how long you practice? You're good, And I knew immediately that was basically saying, I'm not going to correct you, meaning you're really not that good. So if they tell you you're good, you're probably not good, And if they pick on you, they like you, and you're probably good.
Yeah.
So it's like some kind of weird reverse relationship. It's like if your dad comes and smacks you back of the head every day, I guess he likes you, and if he doesn't smack you in the head, he doesn't like you.
That really makes sense based on a lot of the conversations I had with Sifu Tony now. The way you said that, it's like, okay, that makes a lot of sense. Because he has a million stories, and some of the stories line up with what you just said. And, he would explain how, based, like you said, based on how he liked you, or if he liked you, would depend on what you received and what you got. And if he didn't like you, you're just there.
It was really a matter of trying. Were you really trying? Because plenty of people will go into kung fu school and learn the forms and go, "This is cool," and I'm learning kung fu. I can defend myself. I can beat somebody up if I need to. Of course, it's not about any of that. So, yeah you're right. So if they like you, they'll teach you. But if they don't like you, and you have to qualify that, they don't not like you. They don't like the fact that you're a pretender. You're not there. You're not there for the art. You're there because you want the kung fu guy. So.
And so that being said, what are the responsibilities that come with carrying a lineage?
Oh, character. You got to have, and here's another interesting thing about learning a Chinese art like this style. A lot of what you learn and a lot of what your behavior should be and a lot of how you present at an altar come in the form of stories. It's not like, okay, sit around the campfire. All right, you guys sit down. I'm going to tell you a story. I'm going to give you a lesson. A lot of what you learn is, and you don't know this until it happens. You start going, oh, I got to be watching. He's teaching me, but he's not saying he's teaching me. But how many times in a year am I going to see a ceremony like this at the altar? So, and if they're lighting paper or spitting out whiskey, into the air, you better remember that stuff. Yeah. So, so a lot of stuff comes by watching and being taught without being taught. You have to be observant. So at least half of what I absorbed over the years was being taught by not being taught, right? Is all through observation and by watching the behavior, because character is everything. If there's one word that you're going to use to sum up your whole experience and everything within the process of learning kung fu, it's intent. And intent goes to character, it goes to form, it goes to the relationship between you and the teacher, between you and other students, between, how you walk in, how you keep yourself, how you treat other people. Everything in Kung Fu is intent. And pretty much the day you walk into a system or make any kind of commitment or pass a level and agree that you want more, that volume gets turned up. In other words, that behavior, you're always being watched, and your behavior has to be good. There's never, you're never not on in Kung Fu. So
Definitely.
that's a lot of stuff.
What did a typical week of training look like under Grandmaster Yi?
A typical week of training?
Hmm. Or it could even be a class, like a typical class, maybe.
Oh, the class would usually begin. It depended on who your students were. If your students were mostly older, and most of our students are older, old, like 30 or older, right? Not teens. We didn't have kids classes. You would start with this type of warm up, right? And some of that looked like Western stuff, but it was actually out of the Qigong exercises. So usually you would do a little bit of Qigong, Yin Qigong, because our Tensing Qigong can also be done in a Yang form for people who are younger. But anybody in the class over 40 should be doing Tensing, the soft Qigong. And if you're over 50, absolutely, because you don't need the fire anymore, right? So a little bit of soft Qigong, and then some Kung Fu exercises, which are movements that end up going into the forms, and then the forms themselves, and then kind of like Dujong, some two-hand stuff with other students. You might do some drills, and that was typically a class. Just it would exist in those components. Always a warm-up, always circulating the joints and stuff. Always a technique practice, always form practice. Sometimes, and at that point it would depend if a student was working on a staff or butterfly knives or broadsword, and it was and they wanted or needed to practice it, they would go over somewhere and practice it. So then the Sifu would be keeping an eye on everybody. Go over and make a correction on the broadsword. Go over and make a correction on the staff. Go over and correct the people working together. Go over and fix somebody's form. There was, it's like owning a house. Say there's never nothing to do, right?
Yeah.
So there's always something to correct, right? That's why Sifu could never sit still. He'd sit down and everybody would start to move. Like you have to get up because, oddly, and I would tell people this. I'd say when you do a movement, he can feel that, not like feel that, but literally feel that. So if you're doing it wrong, he can feel that. His body doesn't like that, right? So he's got to get up and correct it because the energy's wrong, right? And he's feeling that messed up energy. It's like, I don't like that. What are you doing over there? I got to go fix him, because you literally can feel it. You can tell when it's broken.
Did you guys do much stance training?
No. All the stance training was in the chop step and the circle step.
Okay, because you are holding that stance.
That's where all the leg training was. Yeah.
Got it. Okay.
But as far as like the movies, light an incense and crouch down in a horse stance, no, we didn't do that.
You didn't do that.
Okay. I think Tony did that, but but
yeah, he did.
I never agreed with that.
Yeah, I was wondering about that because I know that he got me doing stance training, and I never really saw it in class much. I mean, we would chop step a lot.
Yeah, we would chop step, and that's where I define myself as a traditional temple-based student. I never trained any technique or introduced any technique into the school like the horse stance that Sifu didn't teach me.
Got it.
So everything I taught, he taught, and if I showed anything that wasn't directly from Sifu to me, I would say, Sifu didn't show me this, but I'm going to give you a technique to help you work on ABC, right? So you either were always getting exactly what Sifu Yi showed, or I would tell you that it wasn't.
Got it.
And
Which,
you trained in my classes, you know that.
yeah, definitely, definitely. And that's why I asked too, because I had trained, with some of the other training groups too, when Jonathan and Yaya were headed up, and even when Peter was teaching, and I didn't recall any like real actual stance training. However, you hold that chop step in the different positions long enough, like your body really feels it, and so
Yeah,
I
I
can
mean,
definitely.
if you want to train it, if you want to connect the body, or if you want to do more strained, we have chop step one, chop step two, and chop step three. So either hands on the hips or hands out with Phoenix Eye, or elbows up.
Mhm.
Um, so I mean, those are so strenuous that I didn't see the point of, like, I even knew some schools would do, okay, do this and then drop and roll. And I'm thinking, drop and roll? What the hell are you talking about? Drop and roll. It's like, Sifu
So you
never did drop and roll. If
so you
Sifu
were
didn't do
right.
drop and roll, it's not in my class. You know, I
That's
just
right.
want to smack him upside the head. You know,
Yeah, yeah. Wow. Are there any, and not just for our system, but are there any traditional exercises that you see like disappearing today? Like nobody's doing them anymore?
um, I have to kind of qualify that. I haven't been around to the other schools recently, but each teacher favors certain techniques. So that means that in some classes, a technique or some techniques might be forgotten or not used very much, but there are a standard series of movements, and that would be evidenced by, you say, well, what movements? You'd have to go to, you know, at the reunion, the test. It would be the test would have the whole list of movements, and I think that should be in mostly every class. So whether they continue it, that really goes, like I said at the beginning, to favor, if a teacher favors it,
Hmm.
then they might add or take away, but uh, I don't think it's intentional,
Hmm.
and I have to remember that I like kind of saying this, but there are no forms, right? Well, what about Sambo Funanchoi and Sambojin? I said, yeah, we use those forms to practice, but forms are techniques put together to practice the techniques.
That's right.
So, as far as, yeah, that question, most of those techniques are going to be in the different forms, which is why we put movements, are forms, are just movements stuck together,
Yeah,
to practice them.
that's right. To chain them because I've noticed before I came to the school, I had been researching the system, and I had found one article with Sigong in it, and he was basically explaining that, and that he had uh, basically created the forms that we practice
Correct, he did.
out of the movements in the system because they were like old school. They didn't do forms. They just practiced the
Yep.
moves.
They didn't do forms, and he created them. He had two uncles that he talked about,
Mhm.
and in New York, Chinatown, in the back alleys, um, he with one of the guys who had trained at the school, an older guy, but he called him uncle, and I think he also trained another style. But he helped Sifu put together the forms for Southern Praying Man, for
Oh,
CKFA.
wow.
Yeah. So they
Interesting.
worked on them. They worked on them together. But yeah, I mean, if you go to Sigong School, um, and you were to walk in, you'd look around, and let's say there's a couple of students and they're practicing like different punches or different kicks and stuff. You go, where's their routines? Where's their forms? There were
Yeah.
no forms. Didn't
Yeah.
exist.
And to what you're saying, so like I remember the day we were in your backyard when I first learned Gaucho, right?
Oh, gotcha. Was fun.
And you were
Yeah.
explaining that, and it's definitely, if not my favorite form, one of my favorites. And I recently saw a video, maybe a couple weeks ago. I believe the guy was practicing a chugar or chowgar, He's out in, I think, in San Francisco somewhere, and he was doing his form, I guess, from their system for Gauchoi, and I mean, it looked so foreign to me, but I could see how he was using it, and it was slightly different. Like the angles on it were different. The application seemed a little different, but very similar also. But it really, I was like, whoa! I was like to see another Gaucho form, and it totally was something totally different. I was
Yeah,
blown away.
questions
But I
like
really,
that come up sometime, Gabriel. And what I say is, so um, Sifu's Qigong's teacher, Lasem Si, was very tall, over 6 foot, and his teacher, Lumsong Si, was about 5'2", right? So um, he had nicknames, the Red Palm being one of them, and we'll come back to him for some history. But his teacher was called Monkey, and it had monkey technique. And the reason I'm mentioning it with Gauchoi is not only is that monkey like, but it's drunken like. So if you get to monkey, you're very close to drunken, and you can take Southern praying mantis techniques and like Gauchoi and do it like drunken and actually embody the energy. So
oh,
it's probably the closest because I've watched a lot of drunken kung fu techniques, and I'm like, I sometimes even get up if I'm watching. If when I was married, my wife and going to bed, watching kung fu movies, and I get up and go, okay. I said, our system can do that. You know, it has it's like an inch from drunken. You
yeah,
know,
yeah. I've actually
so
noticed that, and the monkey, and I see it
and the
more
monkey.
and more now. It's like I don't know. It's kind of like revealing that to me. And these are
Yeah,
questions
so
I've had the last few weeks, literally.
so the technique never changes, but the uh, the person doing it, because of their physical structure, it may look very different. So
Okay, okay, that makes a lot of sense. Wow. Okay. Hmm. And we do, it's kind of a side note, but based on what you just said, um, because I remember when we were first coming into the system, when I first came in, and you would explain like the body, the body, and how you know we have, if I'm not mistaken, monkey legs. Uh, is it dragon body? Uh, I believe.
kind of dragon body, definitely monkey legs, and monkey legs, mantis hands, you know, and almost that the turning is almost dragon like. You are correct in that. So it's almost a dragon torso, but yeah. And when you look at the legs from monkey, it has almost a cat like quality to it. In other words, if we're doing like a leap, if we're training leaping, like
Mhm.
from someone sweeps with the staff, you know,
Yes.
it's like boom, up you go, and like a cat, you come
Yeah.
down and up you go, and like a cat. We used to practice that a lot, and it's amazing how lightly you can land on the balls of your feet with some degree of practice and get like when 15th anniversary of the teaching, when I demonstrated the butterfly knives. I didn't know it, but I saw a side picture because Sifu had me demonstrate the butterfly knives
Mhm.
at the Houston ceremony, and I looked and I'm like, damn, I'm like 6 feet in the air, 5 feet or something. I'm like shoulder high. I had no idea. I just knew I was off the ground, but you know, the system does
Wow.
crazy stuff. You know,
Wow. So there's a hop in that form.
there is.
There is.
Yep.
Wow. Okay. Can't wait to learn that
Yeah,
one.
because you stab the horse and you pull the knife out because you're fighting a guy and a horse,
Oh,
right? And you pull the knife out and then you leap over, right? And then you leap over him and then you roll, right? And when I tested for my Black Sash, and I think I was one of the first to test for the Black Sash in Houston, and I was doing the butterfly knives, and I got to where I was like that far from the table, that Sifu and the two other students were at, and it was time to do the roll. So I did a half step back and ducked down and rolled and came right up in front of the table by him and
Yeah.
spun around. And I think they were thinking, he didn't have any room to do that roll. How the hell did he do that?
You do that.
I thought, I got like 1 foot and I'm going to make it happen.
Yeah,
So
that's right. Yeah. Wow. I know we're talking a little bit about training methods and stuff like that, and I asked you about stuff that could be like disappearing that you don't really see that much anymore. But are there any old school conditioning methods that are rarely practiced anymore? Like that, you don't really see anymore. Because what made me think about it is when you were talking about, you were saying, oh, they don't really want to touch hands, and it made me think like, a few years ago I called you after having this conversation with a friend of mine, Sifu Ben Hill Bay, and we were talking about techniques, and I had started taking some classes with him because I wanted to start to get a feel for what you would speak about when you said, that Bagua unlocks the footwork, and that a lot of our footwork is Baguage, and which is very prevalent if you watch the just the closing of the Qigong, the Ting Sing. It's like, oh, okay, it's clear. Um, and one thing he told me, I demonstrated a form for him. He was like, man, he said, that's really amazing. He said, have you done any like iron fingers training or anything? And I was like, no, not really. He said, man, he said, as beautiful as that is, you're going to break all your fingers. He's like, everything's going to just collapse on you. And he started to explain. He told me, when he was younger and first started training, he said his teacher had him tapping stones until he could break it. And he said after he broke the stone, he didn't do too much more training in that. And he said he wished he would have, but he was like, you have to be able to have your weapons have to be trained to such a degree that yeah, you don't want to, because we have our finger techniques, which they look beautiful, but after you told me that, I was like, oh, I said I gotta up my training or something.
yeah,
Gotta figure it out.
I like using the statement, there's 100 roads to Rome, right? And
Yes.
that works for a lot of different techniques. So on the Mok Foon side, he had 3 or 4 rock buckets that sat down inside of like an X-shaped, 2x4s. And the first was a combination of like peas and really tiny stones. And the next was river rock, and the next was slightly larger. And the final one was rocks about this big, And I thought, well, nobody around here, and I don't see anybody trying these buckets, And I've been here for a while. I'm going to give it a go, So, and so I learned something, one, when you hit, initially, once you hit, you spring out, right? And once whatever you're in moves, right? Whatever the size of the stone, then you can grab, right? And shoot again. But as you're grabbing, the rocks are still moving. And as you're shooting, the rocks are still moving. So you're not hitting stationary stone, right? You go in, hit it, mix it up, start circle, hit it. And so I thought, if that works for this, let's see if it works for this. And I just went down the line, and pretty soon, I just pushed into the big rocks and flexed my fingers so they moved and grabbed and turned in and shot. And I thought, that's how this works, right? And by the time I finished those stones, I turned, and half the school was standing still looking at me because nobody had ever done it before, right? And I think they're thinking, oh, that must be how you do it, right? So I don't know why nobody ever showed me, but I thought, but it looks like a good exercise. So that's one way to do it. So, rather than hitting a bag full of stuff, I was never an advocate of that, but that's just me. The other is our Qigong has something called Yin Yang Yin, and so we go yin, and then once our body's open, we're absorbing the universe, we seal it, right? But what people don't understand is when you seal the body and your body has gone yin, it's not just your body, it's your skin. If you're in Qigong for 15, 20, 30 minutes, your bone is yin. You're absorbing energy through your bone, which means it's going into the bone marrow. So, and once your energy is in there, you've got to seal it. So that's why you go yang, right? And you go in and you lock everything up, and then you go follow that with yin to make sure that none of the organs are holding blood, right? So, because that would be unhealthy. So,
Okay.
but the fact that we have that secretly, and I learned this because of what happened to my body as a result of it. I'm like, because they're like, hey, don't touch hands with that guy. His arms are like iron. I'm
Mm.
like, well, I'm not doing any iron bar training. I thought, but I am doing Qigong. And it's the yang and in the yin yang yin that's hardening my bones.
Mm. That's what
So
you always were referencing. Okay, because you've said it at least 100 times to me in a different way, but the way you just explained it, now it just hit me. I was like, oh,
yeah,
okay,
so makes sense now.
yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so I mean, and the way that you kind of find that out is that um, after you do the qigong and you go to do a form, a yang form, that energy comes into your forearms, and you feel like, dang, I could punch through a wall right now, and you probably could, because the energy is in your hands, right? And that's why Sifu always said the qigong is the fire inside of the kung fu.
Mm,
So if you're just doing physical exercise, you're going to develop something called ging, which is like, it's a snap, it's speed, it's all that, but it's not chi, right? So, but if you do Southern Praying Mantis Kung Fu and you've got Qigong, then your Qigong should fill your Kung Fu, right? And that's why your punches and your techniques and your Han and your palm and all that stuff. That's why it all changes and your bones harden. So pretty soon, um, yeah, they mix, because you have to remember too. The Sifu said all Qigong is Kung Fu and all Kung Fu is Qigong.
mm, wow.
And when you understand that, like that last statement, you go, oh, that makes sense. So um, I'll give you an example.
Hmm.
If you're at a tournament and the masters are watching you and you do a series of yang punches, right? Like 3-step arrow, boom, 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 right? And then you're drawing in. When you draw in, that's a yin moment, right? So you were yang, now you have to go yin, and your movement and your breathing should all set. And when you turn and reset and then chop and get ready to fire again, now you're back to yang. So you go from yin to yang to yin to yang. If you go yang in a form and you stay yang and you're like all the time just hitting, that's not kung fu, because kung fu is yin and yang.
Balance.
Yeah. So you have to be able to go yang and then turn yin and then turn yang and then turn yin. And that if a master doesn't see that, somebody will go, well, geez, his form looked pretty good. That's not what they're looking for. It's like, you've got to, or can you transition? Do you embody both? Right. And if, you have to take a little more time, but that way, when you go to shoot and you go from yin to yang, then I mean you're just on in a different kind of way.
Hmm.
That's the best way to describe it. You're just on, right?
Yeah. And what you just described, as far as with the qigong and breathing into the bone, is this the same thing that people would talk about when they talk about bone marrow washing?
Exactly the same thing.
Okay.
Yeah, that is bone marrow washing.
Okay. Definitely. So
And
it
bone marrow washing, you can't get any higher than that.
yeah, that's powerful, because that's one thing that I've always marveled about our qigong is that, um you know I have I probably have a stack of Montauk Chia books like this, you know, that I've collected over the years. But one thing that I realized early was that I was like, hold up, this qigong has everything that's in these books in one. form. And that's what really blew my mind. Fusion of the five element, uh, bone marrow washing, uh, and you could go on down the line if you're into qigong or have read some of Mantak Chia's books, you know what I'm
Yeah, I
speaking of.
read quite a few Montauk Chi, and I agree, and I think that's why I like it. And I think the ancient wisdom for changing times. In that, I write about that. Not only just the transition, but yeah, it's a whole it's a complete thing. Um, and you're right, it has all of that in it. So
Definitely.
and we have also it's important to understand that there's reverse breathing related to that. And you had asked about that, and you made a note about that in what you were writing me
Yeah.
before coming on.
Yes.
And I'd say the easiest way to describe it is I kind of got to place some labels. Tai Chi, when it breathes, does something called baby breath, right? So when they inhale, right, the stomach comes out, right?
That's
And
right.
then when they exhale, the stomach goes in.
Hmm.
When we inhale, our stomach comes in. And when we exhale, our stomach comes out, right? So it's like, well, um, that doesn't make sense. How can that be? But uh, I haven't read many people who are aware of reverse breathing, but in the few articles I found, everyone refers to it as a high level breathing,
Yeah.
and it's just I would say I don't think you run around good, bad, better, best. It's Tai Chi breathing is great, works wonderfully for Tai Chi, and has many benefits, but that's not our system.
That's not ours.
And we have the benefit. It's a really weird benefit of having the master Lasem C that designed, that designed our qigong. He had knowledge. Uh, I say this because I observe it. I never read it anywhere, right? I mean, he knew quantum. He was thinking in terms of quantum physics. He was thinking in terms of electricity. He was thinking in terms of weather and energy, and he came from Wudong. So it's important they understand that because we're by definition a Shaolin system, because Kwong Sai Juk Lum Ji Tong Long Pai. So, but um, of the three main temples in Wudong, I'm not quite sure which one he went to, but he was a Taoist adept, i.e., a Taoist master, before he came and became the master of the Southern Praying Mantis. And he took that Taoist knowledge and the Shaolin or Buddhist knowledge and blended them to develop this Qigong. So
Mm.
that's part of why our Qigong is so unique because it's neither, it's both. It's not one or the other.
It's the fusion.
Yep, it's a fusion. And
Mm.
you can't name, to my knowledge, and I wouldn't say, well, so this doesn't exist. I have to say, to my knowledge, I don't know of any other where an actual master of Tao connected with a system of Shaolin because, you know, I don't even know what that would be. It's like a Catholic marrying a Jew. It doesn't happen, you know? I mean,
That-
yeah, we're going to infuse these. I mean, yeah, of course it happens if we read romance stories about it, but
for
but
sure.
yeah, but for practices of this, and the other thing you got to understand about qigong is there is no end, right? People always think, well, I'm going to learn this technique, and yes, but that's not the end. It's where it goes to. It's the journey and the fusion, and once it's in your body, the qigong continues to change and develop, right? So
Yes.
if you say, "Oh, yeah, he has qigong to this point," well, that's good. Give him 10 more years, he's going to have qigong to this point, right? So it continues to grow, continues to benefit, and as far as an experience, and I mean that in a spiritual, mental, physical way, there is no end to our qigong. I would say there are definitive ends to many styles of qigong. It's like a karate form, like a kata.
Mhm.
Okay, go east, go west, and okay, all right, do a snap kick. Okay, that's it. I'm not saying good, bad, in between. I'm just saying it's not a series. It's a series of movements, but it's what happens energetically within those movements. It's going into the quiet. It's becoming the watcher. It's hearing the divine. All of that is waiting inside of the qigong. But you got to get there. And how do you get there? You got to practice every day. You know,
Definitely.
so you have to be
Now,
very disciplined.
I know you have to go soon because I know you have some other um, things you have to take care of. But based on what you just said, if you could explain, I know you've explained it to me before, but I think from how you explained it to me, probably 10, 15 years ago almost, that this qigong and this kung fu system has basically, in your eyes, saved your life. And I mean that not like from the streets or something, but like from a health perspective. And that you explained to me you were born with certain challenges, and that
Yeah, I was born with something hereditary. And a little over 3 years ago, I was told by a surgeon, transplant surgeon, that one way or another you were going to end up here. He says it wasn't, nothing you could do. You know, it was lung related, and when I was younger, I smoked, but he said it didn't. That's not the issue, right? He says you were, and he said this like 15-letter word that started with an S. You know, I don't think I heard it before or since, but he says you have this, and so to let people know, today is like June 25th, in 2026. On May 3rd of 2023, I had a double lung transplant. And what's strange is that my family, I'm one of 13 kids. They all knew that I had, studied kung fu and stuff. But I don't try to explain. I tell students, the further you go, either in qigong or kung fu, the less you'll be understood. So don't put that burden on people trying to understand it. Oh yeah, it's this, and that, because that's your journey. They could care less, and that's fine. They got their journey, right? But everyone to the person said, I think that your qigong saved your life, you know, to go through something like that is really severe, and it has a lot of complications. Um, but I do believe that the strength that the condition my body was in when I had the operation, was what helped me to survive. But also, and quite possibly, besides my religious beliefs, um, and because you can study a Buddhist Taoist system and still be a Christian, So I have a combination of beliefs. I think that my beliefs, including the beliefs in the qigong and the energy of the qigong and the condition that the qigong uh, had my body in, was allowed me to survive that. And now it's 3 years later, and I'm still doing good. So that was a good part of it. And I would say that there is no doubt in my mind that there are kind of like spiritual aspects to the kung fu or the qigong, but I wouldn't go very far with it, because sometimes people will say, "Oh, I don't want to mess with that," or it's like, if you grew up in Mexico, you know, it's almost 100% chance you're going to light a candle to the Virgin Mary, right? You know, and if you have spiritual beliefs, and if you light incense in a kung fu system, you're not saying you're a deity. We never say that. What we're saying is we respect. Thank you for carrying on the art. Thank you for passing it on to me. We respect you as an ancestor, and that's what that is, right? So it's not. Can it go further? Yeah, it can go further, but as a rule, that's kind of it in a nutshell. So, um, so that exists. I think all those things exist in my body, and I think that when you embody something energetically, you are that thing. Because I would tell students, and you've heard me reference this, they say, well, how do you get to that point? How do you get so good? How can you do this or that? And I go, all I can tell you is that at some point you quit doing qigong and you become qigong, right? And it's really true. You do, and you stop doing kung fu and you become kung fu. But the only way you become the thing is you practice it, you respect it, you really train to try to do it well, and you become it. So when you start to move, you know, a teacher doesn't move like a student. The student is trying to do movements. The teacher is the movement, right? So
That's right. And I don't want to because that part is crucial um, for people to understand. But from my understanding, you also had another health challenge like early in life that you might not have without the qigong. You might not have made it to a certain level of adulthood, if I'm not mistaken, if I remember that correctly.
I don't know if it was a physical thing, Gabriel, as it was. I was in two scenarios on the highways, right?
Mhm.
And one in Atlanta, one in Houston, and in both scenarios, I could start seeing like cars were coming together, and other cars were coming in, and cars were flipping in front of me and rolling down the road and going off the road, and I was just there. I just I just sat and looked in the rearview mirror and watched, and and just um, and just sort of stayed in that space while all this chaos, every single car around me was going into ditches or flipping or doing something, and my car was completely unharmed, not a scratch, not a nick, never touched another car, and that's happened twice in my life.
Wow.
And I believe that that I was, you could say, blessed or
Yes.
guided, right?
Mhm.
That my work wasn't done yet.
Definitely. And I think I was speaking more to autoimmune challenges.
Oh, yeah. I have scleroderma too.
Mhm.
So, and for anybody out there, you don't want scleroderma. So, scleroderma is where the white blood cells attack the red blood cells, or no, attack themselves to the point where um, what it does, it's sort of in the Raynaud's tree. And part of the Raynaud's tree, for women, it can end up in lupus, right? For men, it can end up in rheumatoid arthritis or, God forbid, scleroderma. So, with scleroderma, that's the reason on this hand that there is no end to my middle finger. Because when the white blood cells start to attack each other, they get to a point um, and they keep the circulation from getting there, and your fingers literally dissolve. Now, if you have scleroderma, it sits in your body usually until, as a man, until your mid 30s, and then it wakes up. It can also go back to sleep, which it has done on numerous occasions, including currently. So, and in that case, so I've had three surgeries, like on this finger, I think I got a lot cut off, and on the middle finger, there's no end to that, and on another middle finger, I had surgery there. So it woke up and went back to sleep. But yes, when that happens, it's almost as if, well, the scleroderma is going to attack one of three places. It's going to go after your fingers and toes, which in my case it was fingers, or it can go after your ears or nose, or it can go after your internal organs. And if it goes after your internal organs, then you're probably going to die. So, and there is no cure, right? It's only, you can only take pain management, right? Um, because and the other thing you can do is reduce stress. So, what in my case, I addressed the pain management. I never stopped doing the qigong, although it was extremely difficult at times. Um, but I think that that was part of the reason that the scleroderma went back to sleep. I can't prove it, but then it's a very unknown disease. There's only 300,000 cases in the United States, right?
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, and like I say, yeah, there's no cure for it. So when you get it, you just have it, and so you have to hope you never get it,
Definitely.
because it's literally like for fingertips. And I'll wrap up with this. It's like
Mhm.
somebody's holding a lighter to your finger while they're squeezing it as tight as they can with the pliers, and it's like that all day, every day.
That's what
So
it feels like. Oh my goodness.
yeah, so your body, literally every nerve in your body is screaming, right? Going, ah. And so I would tell people, I said, if I hadn't been born Catholic, there's no doubt in my mind I wouldn't be here. I would have killed myself. The pain's just that bad.
Wow, that is powerful. Wow.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to switch gears, and then I'm going to ask you these last couple of questions, and we'll shut down for today.
Okay.
What is, in your opinion, the biggest misconception about internal martial arts?
Gosh, that's a good question. Well, I'll tell you a part of the story. You know the guy who did like the Book of 10 Rings, that movie?
Yes.
He came to Winona, where I live in Winona, Minnesota, and did a talk at a college. And I took my book, The Power of Qigong, to him. And because I thought, he must know a little bit about this stuff. So, I got in line like everybody else and got up there and had my little book, here, can you sign my book for me? Gosh, I sure would appreciate it, So he signs the book, and I said, I brought a book for you. And I put it down in front of him. He just looks at the guy, and the guy comes over, grabs the book, and throws it under the table. And I thought, well, that wasn't very respectful. You should really read that book, because he said they might make Book of 10 Rings too. And I thought, from what you just described, you're looking at a guy at that point with 46 years of Qigong training, and squat. You might benefit from that book, and it might help you with real stuff in terms of the next movie you make. But anyway, I don't know if he ever read the book or not. I never did hear from him. But what was the other part? Because I get to rambling.
So it was about the misconception of internal martial arts.
Oh gosh, the misconception. I think probably the idea that you can somehow, the only way that you can get there is through years of practice. It's the only way to get there. There is no quick road. So if a person thinks, and I definitively know that there are people who did this. There are, I'm going to train this, students who come in, you watch them come in, like when I was training under people, I'm going to be your best student. I'm going to train every day, I'm going to train in my underwear in the thunderstorms, and, I'm going to be the best ever, and usually that's the death knell, because you hear them say they're going to be their best student, they're gone in a month. It happens a lot. But as far as the internal, I think the idea that you can get there in sort of a just physical way. I'm just going to do this so many times, and then I'm going to have internal kung fu, right? And it doesn't work. It doesn't work that way. You can get there, but like I kind of said earlier, the fastest way to get somewhere in kung fu is to humble yourself. Do it for the art, do it for the system. Try to find the energy, and don't do it. No ego, no ego, no ego. You never absorb the light. You always reflect it. So the number one thing that any student or any teacher should do when you do a demo or something, and somebody comes up and goes, boy, your kung fu is really good, you better say, thanks, I had a good teacher. You better not say, thanks, I'm pretty good, aren't I? Never, ever absorb the light. You always reflect the light. You always say, thank you, I had a good teacher. So right. I think that way is get out of your own way, love the art, and do it for the teacher and the system, and try to be somebody who carries it on.
Okay. These last two questions, and you've answered this and spoke on this many times before, but what is Qi from your perspective?
Well, I'll define it the way that I defined the word Qigong. So Qigong, loosely translated, means breath work, right? But if you get a little further, it really means breathing practice. You go a little further, it really means an energy practice or an energy discipline. So Qigong is an internal energy. And I think that it's literally it's an energy it's life force, for one, because our life force is, we can call it Qi, but it's also the energy of the universe, right? So in our Qigong, level 1 has a term that says level 1 standing on the earth, right? So if you're standing on the earth, you're on a solid surrounded by energy, right? So you are, by definition, if you're breathing in energy, right, and absorbing energy from above and below, and then dispensing it out again, you are, by definition, a conduit. Like talk about energy, like electricity, a conduit. Your body is a conduit. So it's a conduit for chi. So you're breathing in the energy from above and below, um, and you are a conduit. So I would define chi as like a universal energy, but not just a universal energy. It's a life energy. And when they say energy work, they don't mean just energy work. They mean high level chi energy work. As you go on, you don't start there, right? And you
Yes.
can't do it immediately, because it's the mechanics that draw the energy and redispense the energy. And if the mechanics aren't clean, then the chi won't come on in you, right? Or if your feet are too far, the energy will start to rise, it'll fall out your feet. But these are all things. And so I would like to say this: you can watch our Qigong, and you kind of referred to this earlier, 1,000 times, right? And if you think you can watch Gabriel in a video, do our Qigong and learn it, not a chance. You go train with Gabriel, because Gabriel is going to tell you things that you can't see in a video, and do little corrections that are absolutely necessary. So go train with the teacher, and then after that, maybe Gabriel can teach you via video, because you've got the movements that you need, and he can adjust the angle, right? Or he can adjust the breathing. And when you train Qigong, when a student comes for the next class, you never ever say, "Did you feel this?" And you tell them, give them a thing. "Oh yeah, Sifu, I felt that." So instead you say, how do you feel? Anything new this week? You know, how's your Qigong feel? And if they start saying, "Well, it's strange, because when I'm doing this movement, I'm starting to feel energy here or there." And you're like, okay, they've been practicing, for one. And those are the questions you can only get if you've been practicing. So we can't tell you what's coming. We can teach you the thing that's going to turn it on, right? And then ask you, how's it going? How's it feeling, right? And if you're not practicing, you're not going to get it, right? But that's life. You're not practicing, you shouldn't get it.
Facts.
You don't deserve it.
Yeah. This is my final question, but it's speaking to the last question, and I think it's very pertinent. But how important is breathing to martial development?
No, I think it's everything. Yeah. That's why, like, can a person just learn Southern Praying Mantis Kung Fu and get good at Kung Fu? Yes, you could. Your teacher's got to really define your breathing, because when I said, "Oh, Kung Fu is Qigong, all Qigong is Kung Fu," without having Qigong, you can learn Kung Fu and have pretty powerful Kung Fu. But if you want really powerful Kung Fu, you have to do the Qigong, and because it feels the movements, and it's really like a part of the spiritual core of the system, right? And because it takes such patience, you want to know both sides of the coin, right? You want to know the yin and the yang, and the kung fu is yang and the qigong is yin, and you really want to know both. And in that case, you also want to teach that knows both, that can teach you both. And so, yeah, for people, if people see this or other videos and they want to learn the system, yeah, you'll have to get your information and come train with you. And once they've trained live with the teacher, you and someone else, then you can do correction through, like, with video. But there's no way to really learn it, because we're going to talk about how the energy comes through the feet. It goes up to a certain point, how this comes back at a certain angle. And a lot of times, if an angle isn't right, if the feet aren't right, then the qigong is broken. And the qigong, like the kung fu, if it's broken, it's not going to realize its potential. The energy's falling out of your form. So it's right or it's not. And
And
you need
I
a
think that
qualified
makes
teacher
so much
teach you that. What's that?
Yeah, and that makes so much sense because what I got from what you just said there, um, it took me into quantum physics immediately because I'm thinking the unseen world makes up 99% of our universe, and so if I would think that as above, so below, so 99% of our kung fu skill would have to be invisible, so to speak, non-physical. And
Yep.
so if the breath is the most, like you said, the most important aspect, wow, that gives me a whole, not that
Yeah,
I
and
didn't
it's
already know that innately, but it really put another level on for me.
yeah, and it's waiting for you in the breath.
Yes,
And when I say it's waiting, I mean the kung fu, the energy, and much more uh, that we'll leave for other conversations. But it's waiting in the breath. Yeah.
for sure. With that, Sifu, I'm going to let you go about the rest of your
All
day.
right, Gabriel.
So much for spending
Yeah,
this time.
appreciate it. It's
Yes,
great
indeed.
talking to you, and hopefully we can get this out there, and
Yep,
and uh, you'll get a hopefully you get a request for many more.
for sure. We'll do it again soon, Sifu.
All right, you take care.
You too. Bye
All right, I know.
bye.